Hello, I'm Stephen Pearce, CEO of EMTensor. Hopefully today you will learn how your investment might help accelerate brain injury treatment, saving millions from disability or death and avoiding costs estimated close to $1 trillion annually globally. On the right you can see our functional brain imaging product that could become the beginning of a dramatic reduction in both those numbers. In treating brain injury, it turns out that the time to treatment is the most critical factor. Severity of stroke can be thought of as a starting condition, but time to treatment will determine the outcome for the patient. Stroke, just one type of brain injury, affects 17 million people per year and is the leading cause of disability and second leading cause of death globally. Recent medical advances have dramatically increased the success of the treatment of the brain plumbing problem, that is stroke, but before treatment can be applied, a confirmatory image must be acquired to separate the two kinds of stroke. Hemorrhagic is a leak, while ischemic is a blockage, typically caused by a clot. Clot-busting drugs can break up the latter, thrombolysis, or the clot can be mechanically removed, thrombectomy. The latter has only been perfected in recent years. There is no method to externally determine which type of stroke a patient is suffering because external symptoms, while varied, cannot definitively indicate stroke type. A confirmatory internal brain image is mandatory before treatment can be applied because, for example, applying a clot-busting drug to a hemorrhagic patient can lead to a rapid deterioration and death. Here's the saddest stroke statistic. 1 in 4 adults will suffer a stroke. Perhaps this is why you know someone who has, even within the last year. It has also been estimated that the economic cost to just the US GDP is around $240 billion annually and commensurately larger globally. Our product addresses this need to determine stroke type much earlier in the patient experience by providing 3D brain functional imaging in a portable or bedside form. The solution is compact, enabling assisted stroke diagnosis and later monitoring between confirmatory images from CT and MRI, much needed in the first 48 hours and more frequently than current norms for the years of rehabilitation thereafter. This accelerates the time to treatment by hours when minutes matter and protects the safety of patients already in hospital by alerting to physiological changes once an hour or better when the current standard of care limits updates to once per day at best. Our solution is safe since it uses no ionizing radiation, is non-invasive and requires no contrast agents. It is fast, permitting use during vitals triage, and processing time is limited to 3 minutes currently and improving. Our brain scanner is patient-friendly, reducing agitation during the disorienting experience of stroke and widening the demographics since only the patient's head need occupy the machine. Lastly, it is orders of magnitude less expensive to acquire and use than the confirmatory imaging gold standards of CT and MRI. We achieved this product by developing breakthrough technology that brings the processing time of a full-wave electromagnetic tomographer down from months to a few minutes. Our brain scanner solves an unmet clinical need, yielding a huge commercial opportunity as well as an astronomical societal impact. The base technology can also be extended to other areas of the body, for example chest and other pathologies, e.g. traumatic brain injury, perhaps even concussion. Time-sensitive neurological injury is merely the first target market. This slide depicts just a few examples taken from our initial exploratory clinical trial conducted in Linz, Austria. On the far left is a hemorrhagic case where in the CT scan taken at 8.5 hours after onset, we observe a bright white spot, a classical indicator for hemorrhage. Bottom left, we have the EMTensor brain scan where we depict our suspicion of a hemorrhagic stroke by the color red drawn on the background of the relative permittivity map of the patient's brain, obtained from our brain scanner. Note, the skull is a dark black ring, and the white and grey matter are inside in our image. Also on this slide are 2 sets of images for the same ischemic patient taken a day apart. In this case, the patient clearly has a perfusion deficit region in the middle right perfusion MRI image, the bright green area on the blue background. Similarly, on the diffusion scan, middle left, we observe a bright area indicative of an infarct or dead tissue. Both are clearly shown in the EMTensor image middle bottom. The initial confirmatory image for this patient was taken at 2 hours. They were then thrombolized via injection of the clot-busting drug at 2.5 hours, and despite the treatment, EMTensor was still able to image the perfusion deficit at 9 hours, which suggests it was still there, perhaps somewhat lessened, but certainly not eliminated. At 28 hours, in the top right, we can see the perfusion deficit region is cleared up, no bright green in the blue background. However, this patient has suffered further infarct in the diffusion image to the left of the top right perfusion image. The EMTensor image in the bottom right shows that indeed the perfusion deficit has cleared up, but the infarct remains. This is truly encouraging for our monitoring application because here we observe clear indications of a problem some 6.5 hours after treatment. but at the same time, 27 hours after treatment, we observe the problem is cleared in a way that requires none of the extensive MRI studies of the gold standard. It is worth noting some differences between CT and MRI and our EMTensor brain scanning solution. CT uses ionizing radiation that is long-term danger to both patient and practitioner. CT and MRI require injected contrast agents in the stroke study. Reactions are common, and in the case of CT can be significant. The high cost of MR and CT devices means that they are geographically less frequent and certainly not ubiquitous in emergency departments. MRI additionally suffers from a long examination time, but even though CT can be gathered in minutes, it is often the case that the patient must wait an hour or more before imaging, because for ischemic patients it is often difficult to read and interpret into an actual clinical plan without waiting for some stroke damage to develop and become visible. One might imagine an ideal case where the brain scanner did not use ionizing radiation, had no moving parts, and could gather a 3D image in less than a second, requiring stillness from the patient on that order rather than the 5 to 45 minutes of the CT stroke MRI. No specialized handling is a great benefit to the practitioner, as is continuous monitoring that supports safety of the patient in the hospital. All these benefits are especially useful when delivered in a portable form that can take a 3D image in time frames not dissimilar to taking a snapshot while gathering patient initial vitals. By way of traction, might we submit 23 issued patents and 22 pending for EMTensor Inc. founded in 2012. The basis for this was a further 20 years of scientific research performed by the EMTensor co-founders on the fundamentals connecting blood flow to relative permittivity mapping in the brain, typically non-human trials. Over the years, this fundamental research was funded by numerous grants from Carolina's healthcare system, the US NIH, and the Austrian FFG. Perhaps the most compelling data to date came from a clinical trial imaging 30 human patients multiple times in many cases, and 10 volunteers at Linz, that completed in 2019 and has been used to refine the product since then, creating considerable physician excitement in the past year. Our ask is a Series A investment of $25 million, in which we hope you might take part. That will push the product through FDA approvals, build the medical claims to considerable patient benefit, and then commercialize the product against multiple use cases into a revenue stream that we believe will be initially measured in tens of millions. The Series B is a future debt finance approach we might take to scale production, but an alternate route might be to directly finance the images themselves and selling as a SaaS model, drastically reducing the initial capex cost, perhaps even to zero, thereby eliminating the considerable capex justification required to return the investment for the expensive CTR MRI machines to the hospital customer. A purely hospital-based deployed system count in the hundreds of thousands with an anticipated per unit revenue opportunity of perhaps $500K over time would yield a greater than $50 billion revenue perhaps every 5 to 10 years. That does not include an equivalent or better figure for ambulances or the rest of the countries beyond those listed in the initial market here, but it establishes a ballpark for the available market, perhaps in the $2 to $300 billion region. A more conservative capturable market of perhaps $5 to $10 billion per year within 10 years might be expected from modeling the rollout in reasonably conservative business growth terms. Conservative figures and rollout across the globe in phases was assumed to arrive at the revenue projection figures in the graph on the right that come from and are deliverable by our sales department. In focusing on US and FDA regulated markets, thereby avoiding MDR in the short term, we augmented our team with key US contributors. We added Professor Max Wintermark of Stanford State-of-the-Art Stroke Center, also chair of the imaging working group of the Stroke Clinical Trial Network, StrokeNet, and Professor Oleg Pianik of Harvard Medical School and Mass General Hospital, who literally wrote the book on DICOM, the standard image format, supported by the best and most common CT and MRI image viewing tools in use by physicians today, and how we output our image studies for physician diagnosis. Professor Kyriakos Lobatesis is also a strong contributor to our establishment of lucrative medical claims and valuable solutions to medical problems, and serves as neuroradiologist and neurointerventional lead at Imperial College in London. Similarly, we added Stephanie Harrington of Matrix Medical to establish our clinical affairs program and regulatory strategy, having done the same for 30 plus medical products over the past 20 years. Stephanie is supported by Hogan Lowell, specifically John Smith, who looks after several hundred startups and is in direct contact with the FDA weekly. Abraham Cohen is our chief engineer and brings 20 years experience in the advanced development of CT and ultrasound for a major strategic. Glenn Powell spent 25 years building sales functions for startups in the healthcare arena. Ramiz Balou comes from Nortel and Cisco and provides product management and operations support. Our Austrian genii, 4 PhDs who cover All aspects of our system design have collaboratively brought our imaging capability to physician excitement in the past year, as well as reduced our processing time from 8 hours to 3 minutes. Devinder Bauer is a business advisor who owned and exited his own HMO and has run 3 medical startups in the blood-related space. With that team, we're advancing a bold claim that we can turn back time on stroke-related disability and even, in a way, death, by accelerating the time to treatment for all stroke patients from hours, perhaps to minutes. Our ambulance fieldable brain imaging solution has excited physicians the world over with its ability to determine stroke type, size, position and severity sufficiently well to enable establishment of the treatment pathway much earlier than is currently even a dream. Our ultimate goal might be to make our solution so ubiquitous as to enable a delivery model not dissimilar to that of the automated electronic defibrillator that saves so many lives from sudden cardiac arrest, even with the only 3 million US deployments, where 30 million might eliminate the problem entirely. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to contact either myself, Stephen Pierce, in the US, or LK Ebner in Austria. We would love the opportunity to show you more cases and more successes, and perhaps even our newest pre-production model brain scanner in operation. The 3D isolation of stroke damaged tissue in a DICOM viewer is truly a sight to behold.